Are we ready? Okay. Well, we're from being from North Dakota, we don't generally clap until after the presentation, and we know the person has something to say. Elle, can you start the PowerPoint, please? Okay, well, first off, I'm not the world's foremost expert on EME. There's guys that have done it forever. I've done it for 6 months, but I made the mistake of having a little bit of success at it on a pretty limited station, and as a consequence, Elle found out about this and asked if I'd be willing to do the presentation. Just so happened I was coming down to Dayton this year, so figured, you know, I can do this. First off, what is it? And this is the really simplistic part. I'm assuming a lot of the people here haven't done it. Well, it's effectively using the moon as a passive reflector to do communications between 2 points on Earth. And the moon as a passive reflector is not very good. It only reflects about 7% of the signal it hits it. It's a long ways away. The round trip is around 500,000 miles, so there's a lot of just plain path loss. And there's some other characteristics that occur that I'll talk about a little bit later that make it even more interesting. Why would we want to do this? Well, there's two things. The moon's orbit's aperiodic to the Earth's rotation. The moon's declination, its orbit, is out of the plane of the Earth. Those two things together combined so that at some point or another, any 2 points on Earth have mutual visibility of the moon. And that's one of the requirements of EME. But all of a sudden, you have this big thing up there that is a path between 2 points. Some points are almost constant that this happens. Others occur every once in a while. But because of the oddities in the Earth's or in the moon's orbit around the Earth, we've got a passive reflector that we could effectively work anywheres with the right conditions. Ultimate DX, 500,000 miles. Where else are you going to get to do that? And any 2 points on Earth are effectively equidistant. It doesn't matter if I'm working the guy over there or a guy in Brazil or Antarctica or wherever, the difference in the distance path when you start using the moon is identical. And EME, and this is actually one of the things, the reasons I started messing it, it's a challenge in the best of times. Good equipment and some operator knowledge are both essential to make it work. So in spite of the challenges, EME offers the most consistent method of obtaining DX contacts on the BHF and above frequencies. Kind of interesting. Okay, and here's just a lunar visibility map. This map comes out of a software package called Moonsked. It's written by a gentleman over in Britain. It's in the references at the end here. Here's the sun. Where's the moon? Right here's the moon on here. And the light parts of this are not the where the Earth is lit up, but rather points that have visibility of the moon at that point in time. And this particular, one map I run out, or I took a snapshot when I was in the process of trying to work KL7UW up in Alaska. There's me in North Dakota, and there's KL7UW up in Alaska, and we both have visibility on the moon. So I chased states, I'll mention that in a little bit here. This was an attempt to get Alaska. It just occurred last week, and it didn't quite work out. And that's one of the things that happens in this. It doesn't always work. There's a lot of variables. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of it so we know just how significant what I'm talking about today is. This is a little controversial, but the first EME contact between amateur stations occurred between W6AY and W1BU on July 17, 1960. Both of the stations involved were club stations. Actually, K6AY was the Varian club station. And one of the things about this, I think K6A or W6AY was using a large array, and I think W1BU had a fairly good-sized parabolic dish. The path losses at the time were at the absolute limit to what was available for the equipment. So they applied for an STA for more power. They actually ran 2,500 watts during this, and I think that's why this is sometimes, there's other references that say this wasn't the first one, but this was the first amateur attempt, and that was successful. In '62, there was another group that did it with the limit at the time, which was about a kilowatt, which was a kilowatt, CW. Okay. Nearly all the activity for many years was CW. There were some show-offs that would occasionally, well, this would have been just when sideband was coming in, but there are still some show-offs that do sideband once in a while, but they have really big stations. At first, little was understood except that the moon had to be above the horizon for both stations. You had to have visibility, and sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. With time, more stations became interested, and participation slowly increased. But this wasn't the shoestring era. This was massive arrays or dishes, legal power, the best equipment you could get your hands on or build, and it was a costly time in this particular arena. As technology improved, there was continued increase in participation. The number of stations probably got into the few hundred range scattered around the world, and it started. People started thinking about what can we do with this? Can we get DXEC and a few other things? And the typical station eventually consisted of a 4-by-array, array of 4 antennas phased together with ASL control, high power, the kilowatt, and an excellent radio and preamp. It was still not very much the shoestring era at this point. And CW was still pretty much king, but at this point some people were starting to, when conditions were really good with the really big stations, do a little bit of sideband. And there's your typical 4-by-array. That's what I'm sure most of you think of when you think of moon bounces. You've seen these, or you've seen some of the more extravagant ones, and that's what you think of with moon bounce. The Middle Ages. With time and experience, the amateurs began to understand the issues involved in EME. One of them is the orbit of the moon is slightly elliptical, and that makes about a 2.2 dB difference in the course of a month, or of the lunar orbit. And that 2.2 dB may not sound like much, but with the path losses that are involved, which I think are up in the 260 range, this was enough to sometimes take it in and out of being able to hear the CW signal that was there. And another thing that was figured out was that the apparent temperature of the sky is uneven, and I'll show a picture of that in just a bit. The sky, or the sun, the Milky Way, and some other noise sources are up there, and they have to be avoided. This is again out of Moonsked, and that right there is the Milky Way, and that'll ruin your whole day when the moon is behind that. And when it's right beside the sun is bad. Actually, not as bad as the Milky Way. I've never made a contact when the moon has the Milky Way behind it. I have made a few when it's close to the sun, but it makes it more difficult. There's no doubt about it. These factors taken together form a total degradation number that varies in the course of the lunar month, and also somewhat from month to month because of just the differences in timing on things. The advent of computers made keeping track of all this, and keep in mind, before computers you kind of had to go, well, this, moon's going to be there, that's not a good time, and you had to calculate all this out or use a some kind of a slip chart. And so nowadays, this is what I look at to see if it's a good time of the month to do this or not. Well, the blue line here, that's the distance of the moon from the sun, and you can see here's perigee, up there is apogee. I believe it's red line, that's the apparent sky temperature. And the purple line is the degradation number, and you can see that right now it's not really a good time in the EME community, because this is not coexisting with that, so you don't get the really, really low lows that you can get some points in this. And it's actually a few years away until that starts again. And you notice over 20 and 21 there's a little sun symbol. Well, that means that's time of the month when the sun is close to the Earth. or a moon in the sky, and those are also bad times. But just about any time other than this, you can probably make some contacts. The worst one on the degradation number over on that side, you can make a few, but the key point of this is all computerized nowadays, as is keeping track of where the moon is in the sky. This is out of a little different program called GJ Tracker, written by Lance W7GJ, who I'll mention a couple of times in this. He's probably the world's premier 6-meter EME operator. He's up in Montana, close to me there. And this here, you've got the azimuth and elevation of the antenna for both stations, the sky temperature, the degradation number, and all shown in one nice concise chart. The program also spits this into a file so your tracking software can actually automatically move the antennas. Okay, in more recent history, several factors have combined to make EME a little more mainstream. The availability of computer-optimized Yagis. Back in the beginning days, the Yagis that were used in these big arrays, they were all trial and error Yagis. You just kept doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it until, hey, this one works pretty good. Well, now from the time you get up until noon, you can do 5,000 of them and compare them with the various softwares and either build or buy antennas that have been optimized. And a better understanding of ground gain, and I'll talk about this in a little bit because this is also key for the shoestring type operation. Continued improvement in the cost-performance ratio of the equipment. We have equipment nowadays that we can go out in the fleet market and buy used that the folks that did this originally couldn't even dream of. And more cost-effective on the moderate and high power, for that fact, amplifiers, and the use of the internet to schedule the contacts. Before, you kind of wrote letters, called on the phone, whatever, to get the contact set up. Now there's a couple of reflectors, and you can set them up and then make the contacts. Unless it's during a contest, then that's frowned on. And most important of all was the introduction to WSJT. That's weak signal. Joe Taylor, K1JT, wrote this suite of or program that has a suite of protocols optimized for weak signals. It was introduced in 2001. It's been evolving since then. The JT65 protocols were actually tailored specifically to EME, and there's 3 of them. JT65A has gotten a following on HF, but it was originally designed for 6-meter EME. 65B is what's used on 2 meters, and 65C is used above that. Those protocols offer significant signal-to-noise advantages over CW. I was trying to figure out exactly what the manual says, but the number on JT65B is -24. I don't think you can get 24 dB below a CW signal, so I'm still working on understanding exactly what that means. But most of the JT65 signals that you receive for EME, you can't hear in the speaker. You can see them on the spectrum display, you can decode them, but you can't hear them in the speaker. And, oops. Okay, here's the WSJT program in operation, and I was actually in the process of working one of the really big stations, RW3AC, at that point. And a couple of things to notice here. Notice where the elevation of the antenna is over where Moon says it's at 2.69 degrees. And on the dB number here, this station was at -16. It's one of the strongest stations I've ever worked. The other thing of interest is this number here, which is DT, that's delta time, and notice that's 2.9 seconds. Well, that's the path to the moon and back, plus or minus a little bit because everybody's clock is just a bit off. One of the things that's important with WSJT is that the clocks be right on because it will affect the decode. And if you look over on the side there, that's the messages that are involved in the exchange. I was actually back calling CQ again, but I was originally calling CQ RW3AC responded with the TX1 message, right there, ND0B, RW3AC, and his grid square. I picked that up. I sent him RW3AC, ND0B, EN07, 000. 000 just means I heard you, I picked up both calls. He hears that, he sends back RO. I turn around and send him RRR. The contact is actually done at that point, but it's traditionally to send the 73s. And you can see them all decoding. It doesn't always happen this fast. Sometimes between these messages can be a half hour. I'll talk about that in a little bit here. And here's Spec JT, the spectrum analyzer, while this is going on. Well, this one right here on the bottom, that's actually the where he's calling me, and you can see the data modulation in there. And this is way stronger than this normally is. Most of the time you see the sync line, which is the one over here. You don't see any of the stuff over on the other side. The next one is the RO, and the messages are designed so that RO, RRR, and 73 show up as straight lines up and down. You see the little red tick marks up on the top, they line up with that. So once you've got the deal that's right, the little cross thingy right beside the 0 lined up with the sync, you can line up with those other ones and you know you're seeing that. So even once you get to this point, even if you don't get a decode, if you can see those, you can declare that those are valid. This one here, you've got to decode. That's got to be strong enough to decode. And this protocol, I believe, has some error checking built into it, so it will. You usually do not see garbage. It's either nothing or you get the correct calls. What it can do on occasion is a false decode. In this particular one, the sync number was up at 5. If that gets down to 0 and it's showing some just exotic call stuck in there, and it's not showing the 1s and the 10s over on the side that indicates how deep it looked into its book, that's one you throw away. It might look really cool, but it's not a valid decode out of the program. It's one of the things you got to be careful of with it. Anyway, I mentioned earlier that one of the things, the WSJT was really the game changer that said, okay, now this opens this thing up for everybody else. The other thing I mentioned was the ground gain. And note from and I noted that in the contact with RW3AC that the moon was very, very low at that time. Most of the antenna specs are published with and the diagrams that are published are free space. The antenna's right out in free space. You're not there's no effect from the ground. Well, it turns out that on a horizontally polarized Yagi with some flat terrain, the reflection off the ground augments the signal to a degree. It can be it requires flat obstruction-free terrain, but there can be, let's see what I got. Okay, yeah. There can be, oh, okay, here we go. Up to 6 dB of enhancement is possible. That's theoretical. It's dependent on terrain, soil conductivity, and many other factors. The antenna must be parallel to the ground. In other words, if you start elevating, you lose this. And that's important as we talk later on here. The antenna must be horizontally polarized. If you go to vertical, there's no ground gain. You lose that. You don't. I'll talk a bit more about rotation in a bit, but the key thing about the orientation of the antenna is you lose the ground gain. Calm salt water might see a full 6 dB. Interestingly enough, I was to the top band presentation last night downtown, and they were talking about the history of that. And the first top band contact, they put a Marconi, I told you earlier, Lynn, what was a beverage right on the beach out facing the salt water because that was the greatest gain. Well, it turns out that's true at VHF frequencies too if you're looking for ground gain. That's where you're going to see the full effect. Flat, clutter-free terrain, you might see 3 or 4 dB. Okay, this is a view looking east from my farm where the moon tends to come up. And now I'll point out, I can remember when all of this was nothing as far as you could see. But this is flat. I mean, there's very little that direction. This is the southern direction. That's a little town that's about 1.5 miles away. But again, it's very flat. So I've got a fairly ideal location for this. And here's what I'm talking about. If you look over just above, right around the 5 to 8 dB mark, there's a big lobe. Then up around and then a big null. That's the other thing that goes with ground gain. We're talking about a refraction pattern here. So you get a big null, then another big lobe, then a null. And after I made the very first EME contact that I made, Steve, K5DOG from Texas, sends me an email. And he says, Bill, don't stop at 18, I think I'd stopped at 18 degrees. Keep going up to 25. And I think this doesn't show the full effect of the 25 degree one, because I've made several contacts up there. They come in strong as gangbusters, but I think it's much narrower than this shows. But anyway, that's what we're after when I talk about ground gain. Okay, well, if we're going to discuss this, we need to discuss which band is the best to try this on. 2 meters is far and above the most popular band. The antennas are relatively compact. It's where all the work has been done, and essentially, and the key thing is for every band you go up or down from 2 meters, and it's leaving out the less traveled ones like 220 or 900 megahertz, there's about a factor of 10 less people involved. And if you're going to run a small station, you need a lot of folks out there to talk to. For every band you go up or down, the level of difficulty increases. And I actually started playing with this because some folks in Europe needed North Dakota on 6 meters. And I messed around for close to a year before I got a 6 meter contact to work. I messed around for like 3 days to get a 2 meter contact to work. So the level, there's and we'll keep going. Because of these factors, 2 meters is the best starter band. It's a good band to start on. Going down, 6 meters. Antennas with adequate gain are large. I run a 4-element stepper with the 6 meter kit on it, so there's six elements on a 32-foot beam. That's the absolute minimum antenna that's going to work well at 6 meters. There's probably been a scattering of contacts made with smaller ones. One of them, though, in this bit me, in some of the, and I think you could put probably most in there, of the HF plus 6 meter radios, HF performance was optimized. Well, that's a foregone conclusion. These folks were not selling radios to the 6 meter crowd. They were selling them to HF, and oh, by the way, they do 6 meters. In my particular radio, it was very bad up on 6 meters. I was running a 17 dB preamp in it. I happened to talk to another guy who was having a lot of success. He told me, you need 25 dB. Otherwise, the noise factor of the radio is a significant one. So I have since made some 6 meter EME contacts, but it wasn't until I replaced the preamp. Power is usually required, but fortunately on 6 meters it's pretty easy to get. Probably the most significant one, atmospheric noise and the propagation effects have a significant impact at 6 meters. If there's good E-skip going on, forget it, because the signal's not going to the moon, it's going to Arizona and or New York or wherever. And the number of day participants is limited. There's actually quite a few people active on 6 meters, but the day-to-day group that shows up on the reflectors is pretty small, and the number of big guns is small. Lance, who I mentioned earlier, has a four antenna array on 6 meters, but there's not many of them. They built a station with something specific in mind, and it's a lot bigger undertaking than a 2 meter station. Going up, well, it's compelling because the antennas get a lot smaller. You can get a lot more gain in a lot smaller area, but other things start happening. There's Doppler effects occur with this. At 2 meters and at 6 meters, they're irrelevant because the Doppler effect does not shift the signal enough that it gets out of the passband. So you don't need to usually operate split. The equipment design gets more complicated as you go up. Power starts costing more. Your feed line losses are higher, so you're having to start doing things like putting the preamp out at the antenna. And for each step up in frequency, again, the number of participants gets smaller, where you get to some of the, you get to 1.2 gig, and it's probably getting into the area of 100 stations around the world that are operating this. Antennas are small, but everything else gets more complicated. So I argue 2 meters is a pretty good band to start at. One of the things we have to do if we're going to define success at 2-meter EME is define what we mean by success. And the goal you set at this dictates what kind of a station you need to put together to this. And I put these in what I consider to be the level of difficulty. If you want to make a single EME contact, well, that's the easiest thing. VUCC, which might seem interesting because I put it above to worked all continents, a lot more contacts, but there's a lot of people on over in Europe. I think I've got more grid coverage in Europe than I do in the US right now on 2 meters. Worked all continents is a popular one, and they don't count Antarctica, so you're talking 6 contact. 2-meter worked all states, and finally the most difficult is DXEC. And anyway, my goal when I got involved in this was 2-meter worked all states. I started back in December with meteor scatter, and within 2 weeks I'd worked 25 states on EME and on meteor scatter, and all of a sudden I was working stations, but I wasn't working any more states. Well, I started doing some research and I figured out, well, there's a lot of stations on EME that are in the states that I don't have. So I started looking it over, and I wasn't interested in making a big investment to do this. And the research I was doing was indicating that a relatively modest station, for which I already had most of the parts, would have some success at EME. And I came to this conclusion because a lot of the people I were working on meteor scatter that had a station similar to mine were making EME contacts. That's when I started looking at doing this. So here's what I have in my station. And there were 2 ways to present this talk. One would be with a bunch of boring mathematics that shows, okay, here's the, what you need, blah, 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 blah. The other one is to take something that I know worked, and then we'll work down from there and see what the minimal station is. So I have a computer running WSJT. I have an accurate time source. I actually run a thing called Chronos on my computer, and it keeps the time to within 1/10 of a second. I've got a pretty good radio, a Flex 5000 VU. I've got an interface, and for the 5K VU, that's actual all in the computer. I'll show a picture one in a bit. It's a common one. Modest power. I run an old AM6154 for 300 watts. My antenna is a M² 2M12. They rate it at 14.9 dBi. I've got LMR 600 run up to the antenna, so less than a dB of loss up to the antenna. Obviously very flat terrain, and because of nothing around me, pretty low noise. So any noise problems I have are self-generated. So there's a computer running WSJT. You can see the 2 programs on there. On the second monitor off to the side, you can see the Flex 5000 software. Over here, you can see my tracking stuff. There's a typical interface. There's the radio. There's the old AM6154, and I literally found that laying in a corner just before I started doing that. I bought it 25 years ago from a guy who was moving away and forgot I had it. So that became my 2-meter power source. And way up on top above the step IR, you can barely see it up there. That's a 2M12. That's all I use on this. All right. Well, what can a station like this do? Since January 21st of 2012, when I worked Dmitry over in the Ukraine, I've got 76 EME contacts. Out of that, I got 6 new states. That's what I was really interested in. 26 DXEC entities, 60 plus new VUCC grids, and off to the side there, I've kind of got a running tally of what I've done with this and with meteor scatter. And I've got 4 continents. The 4 continents is really easy, the easy part. For some reason, there's not a lot of activity in South America. I haven't managed to snag one of them, and I don't remember which the other one I'm missing right now. And most of these contacts, and this is significant, are made with the 4x stations. In other words, the stations that have the 4 antenna arrays, and those are the ones that number in the several hundred around the world, maybe even to the thousands by now. So if you can contact those, you can do a lot of things on here. this station with the ground gain can operate those stations. So that's the modest station that we're talking about here. Not exactly a guy with an HT aiming across Yagi up at a satellite, but you can do it with what's a pretty modest station, and that, you know, some of us probably already have the equipment for. With this station, or by being able to work the 4x stations, worked all states, worked all continents, and VUCC are all attainable with that particular station. What if my goal is 2-meter DXEC? Well, that goal is the realm of the 4x and bigger stations. There are a lot of 4x stations out there that hit 60, 70 countries, and they stall out. I'm not going to say it can't be done with a small station. One of the people that contacted me after I put out a call for help once I was doing this talk is a guy in northern Minnesota who was 700 watts and I think it's like a 17 element Yagi in his backyard that he Armstrong rotates, has worked 700 EME contacts over the course of about 10 years, and I think he's got DXEC done. But the thing about it is there's probably 50 DXEC entities that are very regularly on. There's another 25 that kind of come and go, but that only gets you up to 75. You have to work the DXpeditions if you're going to get this. Unfortunately, they're all running this modest station with the single Yagi and power. You're not going to work those stations, and you pretty well need to. I've tried, Vietnam was on, they had a single Yagi. I decoded him once, and I was happy for a week afterwards that had happened. So DXCC is probably not practical with this station. Okay, what if the goal is a single EME contact? Well, to start with, I'm going to try and talk you out of that, because while it might be a nice goal, it's a pretty steep learning curve for a single EME contact. The typical 4x, but on the flip side here, the typical 4x state contact, and if you remember on WSJT there was a signal strength. Now that it's not really a signal strength, it's a signal to noise ratio. WSJT, when it's sitting there not picking anything up, is going, okay, here's the noise floor. When it starts getting a signal, it says, okay, this is risen above it. The typical noise floor is around minus 33. The 4x stations, those contacts, most of them I see in the minus 21 to minus 24 range, where as you go higher in number, those are weaker signals. WSJT usually decodes around minus 27 dB if your noise floor is 33. And when I say usually, QSB comes into play on this. If the signal's getting stronger and weaker, it's really better to have a little bit more than that to make sure you get a decode. So we effectively got 60 dB to play with here. Well, if we switch from the 300 watt AM64 to 160 watt brick, we just lost 3 dB. If we just use 60 watts out of the radio, we lost 7 dB. If we strip down the Yagi and go from 12 elements to 7 elements, we lose 2.6 dB. And if we go horizontal on the antenna, which a lot of people have for FM, we're going to lose an estimated 3 to 4 dB doing that. So let's take a look at, good time to talk about rotation, because I just talked about polarity or polarization of the antenna. Polarity in EME, there's really two things to think about here. One is geometric. Okay, so you got a station up on the North Pole and a station in the Brazil, and this is just hypothetical, the moon's over there. Well, you got 90 degrees polarity difference in the antenna. Signal goes out, reflects, come back here. That's 30 dB. Fortunately, that's not important, because as the signal leaves the Earth, it gets rotated by the Earth's magnetic field. When it comes back, it gets rotated again. Faraday rotation is probably it's what makes EME possible, because otherwise geometric rotation would be a factor, and you'd have to rotate the antennas, and that's not always physically possible. but it's non-constant. In other words, you do it 2 days in a row at the same time, it's going to be different. It's time varying. In the course of a contact, it slowly turns, and that actually makes it practical for 2 different stations to work. And it's non-reciprocal. If I send a signal out and go to listen to it coming back, it's going to be, when it comes back, it does not turn the same direction that it went in. It's a random number. It's really truly random, except that it's fixed in a short period of time and then rotates. So I might send a signal out, try and hear my echo. I won't hear it. Do it an hour later, I'll hear it. And the same with 2 stations trying to talk to each other. You're a little dependent on that. Sometimes within the course of the contact, one station will hear the other. You just keep running, and 15 minutes later, that's gone, but the other station is hearing. So that sequence that you go to over the course of an hour or so, the Faraday rotation will flip it through all the pieces that you need. It's a lot more common to just, oops, bang, 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 they go back and forth. You might miss a few because the signal levels are low, but I have sat around waiting for Faraday rotation to come in. So the key thing is the relative antenna polarization is irrelevant. The bigger thing is the ground gain that's involved. Okay, so let's take a look at a really small station, a 60-watt antenna with 7 vertical elements. Well, we've lost 7 dB on the radio, we lost 3 to 4 dB ground gain, and we lost almost 3 dB on the by the antenna change. That combines for 13 dB down. I'm just guessing at that, but there's probably less than 10 really big stations in the world that have a chance of working with this particular station. And if it's going to work, it's going to take time and patience and may not be successful. Now I'm going to show you what I mean by a really big station. 2 pickup chassis, a central mount, and I forgot to look up the number, but you can't really see it, but there's both horizontally and vertically polarized antennas in that array intermixed on it. This is KB8RQ. He's actually fairly close to Indianapolis. And he was my, I think, 2nd or 3rd EME contact. And he's the only station I've ever seen down around -12 on that scale. And he's going to come into play a little bit later here. But so if the goal is to make a single EME contact, and you have that very limited station I was just talking about, 60 watts and 7 vertical elements, this is the guy you want to talk to. And he's pretty patient, and he's done. I've seen him do this a few times, and I'll talk about one of them a little bit later here. Okay, how about 160 watts and 7 horizontal elements? Well, that's a combined 5.7 dB down from the modest station that I talked about. And this, I picked this because this might be a little bit more common station. Well, from the -21 baseline for a 4x station, this is at about -26.7. And I remember I said WSJT likes to see about -27. I've seen it decode at -28, but it gets a lot more iffy. This should be decode, but it's iffy, very dependent on conditions. So you'll work some of the large stations and some of the 4x. So if you want to make a handful of contacts, this station will work. And I'm estimating that over a long period of time, you might be able to make 50 initial contacts with this one. And an initial just means that I'm working this station for the first time. Okay. You argue, well, it's noisy at my QTH, and this occurs more often than not when you're in town. The consumer electronics nowadays are getting horrid, as we all know, and it even gets up on the 2-meter band. I have a fairly substantial network in my office for the work that I do, and I've got I don't have a general rise in the noise, but I have birds all over the place. So if you talk to the EME crowd, you go, oh yeah, go look for Bill on 121, because that's one of the places where I don't get many birds in the passband. EME, especially with a modest station, is obviously not tolerant to much noise. And I've got a friend in Nebraska who's been trying to make contacts with much the same station as mine, and he's got a handful of them, but what he's got is about 6 dB of noise. And so it really raises things up out of it. Well, one of the solutions to that is to elevate. So if you start tilting the antenna up, then the front to back ratio comes into play, and you're looking up above the noise. But unfortunately, you lose your ground gain. You might lose that 3 to 4 dB that you had there, and while you lose 3 to 4 dB, you lose most of the noise. It might be just a trade-off, but it might be a situation where you need to make up with it with more antenna gain, either a larger single Yagi, or there's a guy down in Louisiana runs a pair of Yagis just for this reason. One man's quest. This was kind of a fun thing to watch. When I first got involved, he was just starting to do this. VE1SKY, Roger up northeast part, or I guess be southeast part of Canada, decided he wanted to see if he could make an EME contact with 160 watts in his log periodic array. The log periodic has about 8 dBi of gain, so you're looking at about 6 to 7 dB of difference plus another 3 with the drop. So this is about a 10 dB delta from the station that I had success with. He tried this for a couple of months, and he says, I'm going to give a trophy to the first guy that works me. So he had the Sky Trophy made. He had this on his website for a few months. He tried successfully over the course of a few months. He was being heard occasion, he was hearing occasion, but never together, he never completed. He finally completed with KB8RQ, who kind of made it a project to get this done, that great big station on March 20th. So there's the Sky Trophy. That Gary has that now. That actually, I think, is around here someplace. It's in one of the booths. He borrowed it to him with some of the equipment. I'm not going to say where it's at, but it's in one of the booths around here someplace. And so anyway, the point of this is a pretty modest station. Yeah, you can make a few contacts. If you, let's go to the conclusion. Success on EME is within the reach of a modest station. The station required depends on your goals, and in Roger's case, he'd actually made other contacts with other equipment. He just decided, I'm going to see if I can do this, and in fact he did. The number of stations that can be worked by a small station gets a small station get to be very limited, but a very small station can in fact make an EME contact or two, but it's going to require some patience and probably more knowledge than that one contact is worth. Getting started, and this is actually what I did, the later on part of this. Read everything you can, talk to everybody who will talk to you, check into the chat rooms. There's a few EME-oriented chat rooms. They're mostly used for scheduling contacts. Newbies are very rapidly grabbed onto by somebody and helped out, especially getting the WSJT software working. That can get interesting at times. I personally think a good path is there's that JT65HF program out, which is really JT65 for idiots is what I call it, and I started with it. But what it does is it's a lot easier to interface the radio to. You don't need to know quite as much about how the audio works and stuff. And it gets you, on HF where the signals are strong, it gets you used to that handshake structure that's used to make the contacts. From there, whoops, I don't have to click when I'm just doing over here. From there, get WSJT going and use FSK441, the meteor scatter mode, to make a few meteor contacts. That handshake is a little bit closer to the one that you use on EME, and it gets you used to WSJT. And finally, use JT65B on some 2-meter EME contacts. Here's some resources. Lance W7GJ, just do a search on him, and he has an incredible website. It is aimed mostly at 6-meter EME, but the information is general. Lance will argue that 6 meters is easier than 2 meters. I'm here to tell you it is not. 6 meters is not for the faint of heart. I've got my teeth cut on it now, but that's a difficult band. You'd be better off going up than down. The WSJT software and manual, and that's on Joe's website at Princeton. And again, just search for WSJT and you'll find that. The MoonSCAD software that I showed, and you don't really need that until you start doing it unless you want to see how it tracks the moon and stuff. That's written by GM4JJJ, and that's freeware. This is, he likes it's shareware, but he likes a contribution. Chronos is the best time sync program that I've found. The free version of it is obnoxious. The paid one for $10, it quits doing all the obnoxious stuff. The JT65 EME1 chat page, and that's on the same. Just follow the link, and that's the one where most of the 2-meter EME crowd hangs out. The ON4KST EME chat page is where most of the 6-meter crowd hangs out. The ARRL handbook has a pretty interesting piece in it. Beyond the line of sight, this gets into the history, and it's an older ARRL publication. I picked one up off of eBay, and it's actually actually Amazon. It's actually an extremely interesting book. It's all about the early days of VHF, UHF, and just reading it, you get an idea of, how much of a debt we owe to those folks for the struggles they had just figuring out the propagation modes and stuff. And then on EME history, W6PO, who worked at Varian for many years, his daughter has a blog, and like I said, that first EME Contact was a little controversial because of the power involved, and the blog has a ton of information about that, so that's very interesting reading. So, questions?